She was 3 years old when she started crying at airports. Not the way children cry when they're tired or hungry. This was different. This was grief. A specific adult kind of grief that her parents didn't have words for. She would press her small hands against the glass and sob in a language nobody in her family spoke. The words weren't gibberish. They were formed. They had weight. And when her parents finally had the sounds translated, they went quiet for a very long time. She was describing a house, a street, a husband she missed. Her name was Shanti. She was born in Delhi in 1926. And the place she wept for, every time she saw something that moved between two worlds, was a town called Mathura, a place she had never visited, a place her family had no connection to whatsoever. Now, before you decide what to do with that, stay with me. Because this isn't a ghost story. This isn't candle-lit folklore designed to make you feel something for 10 minutes and forget it by morning. What Shanti Singh's case became after Indian government officials investigated it, after neighbors in Mathura confirmed details that only the deceased woman could have known, was something far more uncomfortable than a ghost story. It became evidence. And evidence, unlike a ghost, doesn't disappear when you turn the lights on. Here's what I want you to hold for the next little while. The thought that your hardest struggle, the one that keeps returning no matter how much work you do on yourself, the pattern you cannot explain, the fear with no memory attached to it, the love that felt like recognition the very first time. What if none of that is random? What if it isn't even new? We are going to go somewhere most people are too afraid to go. We're going to look honestly at the idea that the life you are living right now is not your first attempt. That the weight you're carrying, the kind that feels almost cosmically unfair, was written before you were born into this body. And that the moment you understand the system behind your suffering, something shifts. It stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like curriculum. But first, let me tell you what they found in Mathura. Because what those investigators discovered when they knocked on doors in a town that a 3-year-old girl had described in precise detail, that is the thread we are going to pull tonight. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end, that thread will have unraveled something inside you that you didn't know was knotted. There is a word that most people think they understand: karma. Say it in a coffee shop, and someone will nod knowingly. Post it under a story about someone finally getting what they deserved, and the likes will follow without anyone thinking twice. It has become shorthand for cosmic justice, a vending machine you feed good deeds into and wait for your reward to drop. That version of karma is almost entirely wrong. The real thing is far older, far stranger, and far less comfortable than a social media caption. The Sanskrit root of the word is cry. It means simply to do, to act. Karma, at its core, is not about reward and punishment. It is about consequence, not moral consequence, mechanical consequence. The same way a stone dropped in still water produces ripples, whether or not anyone is watching. Every action, every thought, every desire you have ever acted upon produces a ripple, and ripples do not stop at the edge of a single lifetime. Paramahansa Yogananda understood this better than almost anyone who tried to carry Eastern philosophy into Western minds. In his autobiography, the one that has never gone out of print since 1946, the book that Steve Jobs requested be placed on every iPad given to every person who attended his memorial, Yogananda describes a moment with his guru, Sri Yukteswar, that stops you cold when you read it. His guru tells him, plainly, that he has work remaining in a future life, that certain karmic knots cannot be fully untied in a single incarnation. He says it the way a carpenter might say a piece of wood needs a second coat. No drama, no dread. The calm certainty of a man who understands the structure of time the way most of us understand the structure of an ordinary afternoon. Yogananda did not receive this as bad news. Sit with that for a moment. Because the entire framework of karma, understood properly, was never designed to terrorize you. It was designed to explain you, to hand you a map of terrain you have been walking blind, and the map does not say you were lost. It says you are in the middle of a route that started before you remember and continues further than you can currently see. Here is the mechanic. Pay attention to this part. Every action creates what the ancient texts call a samskara. Think of a samskara as a groove, not a memory exactly, deeper than memory. A groove worn into the fabric of your consciousness, the way a river carves a canyon over centuries. Do something once, and you create a shallow channel. Feel it deeply, repeat it, make it the organizing principle of who you are, and the groove becomes a canyon. Your attention, your energy, your instincts will always flow there first, even when the body changes, even when the name changes, even when the conscious mind of a new life has no idea why it keeps arriving at the same place. This is why certain fears feel pre-installed. This is why some people walk into a room and go cold with unease and cannot name a single reason. Why a child picks up an instrument and plays as though they are remembering rather than learning. Why some losses feel like they are grieving two things at once. The immediate one, and something older underneath it, something without a face. The grief recognizes the shape of the wound, even when the mind cannot recognize the knife. Now, here is where it gets heavier. Karmic debt is not about sin. The ancient teachers were careful about this distinction, and it gets lost almost every time karma enters a modern conversation. Karmic debt is about incompletion, lessons not fully absorbed, relationships left unresolved, patterns of action that pulled a soul in a direction and were cut short before the full consequence could deliver its teaching. Think of it this way. You begin a sentence. The sentence ends before the period arrives. The meaning is incomplete. The sentence ends before the period arrives. The meaning is incomplete. And the incomplete sentence does not get filed away as finished. It gets carried forward, pending. Yogananda described certain souls as carrying heavy karmic luggage, not because they were wicked, because they were unfinished, because the lessons were large and the lifetimes were short and the work was still ongoing. He spoke about people who arrive into difficult families, difficult bodies, difficult circumstances, and he said it with a precision that felt less like philosophy and more like a diagnosis. The difficulty was not random. It was the exact instrument needed to complete what was started. You have felt this too, haven't you? The feeling that some of your hardest struggles are too specific to be accidental, too perfectly calibrated to your exact weak points to be the work of blind chance. Like, whatever keeps pushing you knew exactly where to push. Maybe it did. The Bhagavad Gita says, in its oldest translations, that the soul does not die. It changes clothes, and it brings its habits with it. Not its memories, its habits. The things you cannot stop doing, the ways you cannot stop feeling, the relationships you keep recreating with different faces. These are not merely personality quirks. They are not solely the residue of your childhood, though your childhood is certainly in the equation. They are, if this framework holds, the echo of choices made across a span of time that your current mind cannot access, but your soul is still settling the account for. And now the question that everything else in this video will work toward answering. If the debt is real, is there a way to pay it down? Is there a way to accelerate the process, to consciously cooperate with what is trying to complete itself, rather than spending another lifetime fighting the same battle without understanding what the battle is for? We will get there. But first, we need to make this personal, because the ancient framework is only useful if it lands in your actual life, and for that, I want to tell you about a man from Pune named Arjun, who spent 4 decades fighting a war he didn't remember starting. You might be thinking this is all beautifully abstract, that it is moving but unprovable, and that the gap between moving and true is the gap where you live. Hold that thought. Arjun held it too. Right up until he couldn't. Arjun Mehta was 43 years old, the first time anyone suggested his suffering might not be entirely his fault. He didn't believe them. He had spent too many years building the case against himself. He was born the second son in a household where second sons were an afterthought. His older brother Vikram received the better school, the more patient version of their father, the good clothes. Arjun received what remained. Not cruelty exactly, something with a longer half-life than cruelty. Indifference, the specific kind that teaches a child, without a single word being spoken, that their presence is not quite necessary. He grew up and made himself necessary by force. Built a software consultancy in Pune from a rented desk and 12-hour days and a stubbornness that his wife Priya sometimes loved and sometimes needed to leave the room to survive. By his late 30s, he was doing well. By 40, he was doing very well. And that is precisely when everything began to dismantle. The business partnership dissolved. Ugly, public, expensive in every currency. A major client left 6 months later. And then Priya, who had held the household together with a quiet competence Arjun had long stopped noticing, told him one evening over cold dinner that she felt invisible. He heard the words. He could not feel them. And this detail, this specific gap between hearing and feeling, was not new. His mother had lived on the wrong side of it. His college friends had eventually stopped trying to cross it. Everyone who had ever loved Arjun had at some point described the same experience. The sensation of standing outside a locked room in a house where all the lights were on. Arjun was not a bad man. Everyone who knew him would tell you this without hesitation. He was reliable, fair, generous with his time. But there was a place inside him that warmth could not reach. A room that had been locked so long he had stopped remembering it was there. 3 weeks after Priya's admission at 2 in the morning in his study, he typed something into a search bar that he would never have predicted typing. Not because he believed in the answer he might find, because he had exhausted every rational explanation, and the irrational ones were all that remained. He typed, "Why do I keep people at a distance without meaning to?" The third result mentioned past life regression therapy. He closed the tab immediately, then opened it again. What followed was 6 months Arjun later described as the most uncomfortable and the most necessary thing he had ever done. He found a therapist in Pune who practiced regression work. He arrived skeptical enough that he told the therapist so up front. The therapist said that was fine. Skepticism and openness could coexist. He went back 7 times. I will not tell you that what Arjun encountered in those sessions was literally a past life. That is not a claim I am going to make for him or for you. What I will tell you is what he experienced and what changed afterward, because both of those things are real and documented, regardless of the framework you use to explain them. In his 4th session, Arjun described a life in precise and unsolicited detail. A merchant, coastal. Something in the texture of the imagery suggested 4 or 5 centuries ago. He had a family he loved genuinely and kept at a careful distance professionally, because the business required constant travel and a protective hardness that kept competitors from taking what he had built across decades of work. He described returning home repeatedly to find his children slightly older than he remembered, his wife polite in a way that meant something had closed. He described a death that came before he was ready, before the things unsaid had been said, before the room he kept locked for survival had ever been opened even once for love. He did not find this story healing in the moment. He found it precise, the way a doctor's diagnosis can feel before it becomes a plan. 3 weeks after that session, Arjun called Vikram, not to argue, not to revisit old wounds. He called to ask one question: "Did you ever feel like I was somewhere else even when I was in the room?" There was silence on the line long enough that Arjun thought the call had dropped. Then Vikram said, "Every single time, brother, every single time." What happened between them after that is not the stuff of dramatic reconciliation scenes. It was slow. It required Arjun to do something his entire internal structure had been built to prevent, to be seen without knowing what the person doing the seeing would do with what they found, to stand in the doorway of the locked room without being certain it was safe. Priya noticed the change before Arjun could name it. She said he started arriving. She meant it exactly as it sounds, as though, for years, he had been sending a well-prepared representative to the important moments of their life, and now the actual person had begun to show up instead. He does not claim certainty about the merchant. He will tell you honestly that he cannot prove the image was a memory rather than a story his mind built to contain an old pain. What he will tell you is that the image gave his pattern a shape he could finally see from the outside. It gave the locked room an origin that was not simply his failure. And that reframe, whether it was literally true or psychologically true, gave him something no amount of professional success or self-improvement literature ever had: permission to be unfinished, not broken, not failing. Mid-sentence, and the thread I am leaving slightly open, Arjun still has the lock. He still has days when the room closes and the distance returns and the old groove runs deep. Progress in this framework is not erasure, it is reduction. The canyon becomes a creek. The water still knows that channel, but now there are others. That is what working through something old actually looks like. Not a single transformative moment, a slow, patient, imperfect reclamation of ground. Imagine a loom, not a small one of the great old looms that filled entire rooms where threads ran floor to ceiling and a single tapestry took years to complete. and a single tapestry took years to complete. The wooden frame is dark and smooth from decades of hands. Thousands of threads, each a different tension, each a different color, running in their own lane, but always touching the threads on either side. Each thread is a lifetime, each color a quality being developed, a lesson being learned, a pattern being worked through. Some threads are bright and loose and move easily through the frame. Others are almost rigid, tightly wound, and where they run through the fabric they create a hard texture, a place where the surface of the cloth catches and resists. Where your finger run across the weave would snag. Those are the knots. Now watch what the weaver does. The weaver does not stop at a knot and declare the cloth ruined. Does not cut the thread out, because cutting it leaves a hole, and a hole is not a resolution. It is a different kind of problem that will need to be addressed eventually. The weaver works the knot from both sides, slowly, with a patience that exists outside of the normal relationship with time, loosening it incrementally, redistributing the tension, until the thread begins to move again, until it can carry color again, until the place that was rigid becomes, over time, part of the pattern. Here is the thing about standing too close to a tapestry. You cannot see what is being made. All you see is the knot directly in front of your face, the resistance, the tightness, the place where nothing moves and the color is wrong and nothing seems to be working no matter how long you stand there. And you think, this is the whole cloth. This is all there is. Step back, step further back. The pattern is there. It was always there. The knot is not a flaw in the design. The knot is part of the design. The tension in that specific thread, in that specific place, is creating a texture that the surrounding cloth requires. Without the dark threads, the bright ones have no contrast. Without contrast, the image has no depth, no shadow, no life. The loom is not silent either. A great loom working is one of the most complex sounds a room can hold. The wooden frame under tension has a low creak, almost felt more than heard. The threads themselves, pulled taut, carry a resonance below the range of comfortable hearing, something that registers in the chest before the ears can name it. That sound is the sound of work being done, not punishment, not abandonment. Work, active, ongoing, purposeful work. You have been in that tension. You may be in it right now. And what I want to offer you is not a comfort that erases the difficulty, but a reframe that can sit beside it without collapsing it. The tension is the loom working. The resistance is not evidence that you are losing. It is evidence that something is being made. We started in an airport, a 3-year-old girl, hands pressed against glass, weeping for a home she had never been to in this life. The investigators who traveled to Mathura found a family, a house whose interior matched her descriptions with a specificity that the researchers documenting the case described as inexplicable by any ordinary means. An elderly man who had lost his wife young, who confirmed detail after detail that a child in Delhi had carried without a single visit, without a photograph, without any conceivable source. The case of Shanti Singh remains one of the most carefully documented cases in the formal research on past life memory. It is not proof, if proof is the standard you require, but it is evidence, precise, verifiable, and humanly inexplicable evidence that something about us persists, that something carries forward, not the memory, the grief, the shape of what was left unfinished, the specific emotional signature of a knot that the loom had not yet worked through. Here is what I want to leave with you tonight. You are not a mistake, not the pattern you keep falling into, not the struggle that has followed you across every good season, not the fear that lives deeper than any reason you can name for it. These are not evidence of a flaw in your construction. They are evidence of a soul still in session, still mid-sentence, still with a patience that is ancient and unhurried and entirely on your side, working toward the period. The karmic view of suffering is not passive. It does not ask you to simply endure and call it spiritual. It asks something harder and far more interesting. It asks you to get curious about your pain, to stop fighting it long enough to ask what it is trying to complete, what it is trying to teach you by refusing to dissolve until you have learned it, what quality it is building in you by applying exactly this kind of pressure in exactly this place. Tonight, before you sleep, try this one thing. Bring to mind the struggle that has followed you the longest, the one that has resisted every attempt at explanation, the one that feels, on your hardest days, like a cosmic unfairness. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask instead, what is this finishing? You do not need the answer immediately. You do not need to believe everything we have explored tonight for the question to be useful. Ask it. Let it sit in the quiet of the night and see what it finds in you. The tapestry is not finished. It has never been finished in a single lifetime for any soul that has ever lived, but it is moving. It has always been moving, and every knot you have ever pressed your face against and thought this is everything, this is all there is, every single one of those has already become part of a pattern larger than your current vantage point allows you to see. One more thing before you go. Karma does not travel alone. It travels in relationship. The people in your life right now, the difficult ones, the ones you love with a ferocity that surprises you, the ones who push exactly the right buttons with exactly the right precision to undo you, they are not accidental. In the oldest maps of how souls move through time, they are the other threads on the loom, and the relationship between your thread and theirs is not a coincidence. It is an assignment. Why the hardest person in your life might be your oldest contract. Why love and difficulty so often arrive in the same body. Why forgiveness, real forgiveness, might be the fastest way to pay a debt that has been accumulating longer than this life. That is the next thread, and it is waiting for you.